Well, I've been looking forward to the reading tonight. And our poet tonight is Joe Wilkins. And Joe is the author of a memoir, The Mountain and the Fathers, Growing Up on the Big Dry, which was winner of the 2014 GLCA New Writers Award. And 2 previous books of poetry that's previous to his current book, Notes from the Journey Westward and Killing the Munyon Dogs. So his most recent collection, When We Were Birds, was selected by Billy Collins, maybe you'll tell us more about that, for the Miller Williams Poetry Prize series, and is now out from the University of Arkansas Press. I brought a copy up to show you, so you might imagine I'm holding it up now. I think it's back on my chair. And this also recently won the 2017 Oregon Book Award for Poetry. So congratulations for that award, Joe. Let's give him a hand here. So that's quite an honor. A Pushcart Prize winner and National Medalist Award finalist, he has published essays, poems, and stories in a variety of magazines. And he's, as the winner of the Boyden Wilderness Writing Residency, he and his family spent the summer and fall of 2015 living in a remote cabin along the Rogue River in the Klamath Mountains, which sounds terrific. So maybe you'll tell us a little bit about that. He makes his home with his wife, son, and daughter in the Willamette Valley, where he teaches writing at Linfield College. So would you join me in welcoming our poet for the night, Joe Wilkins? Yeah. Come on down. Yeah, come on down. Great.
Thank you, Tom, for gotcha. For that kind introduction. And thanks to all of you for being here. One of the great joys, we moved to Oregon 4 years ago, and one of the great joys for me in coming here has been the vibrancy and the energy and the attention that the literary community here has. From Portland to Joseph to Eugene, there are people who are reading and listening and writing, and it's just been a joy to join that community. And it starts at places just like this, right? This is what it is. This is what it means to be part of a literary community. So thank you for having me here, and thank you for coming out tonight. So I'm going to read a few poems. I'm going to start with one from my very first book, Killing the Munyon Dogs. And I start with this one because I think it's kind of a poem of invocation. Though now that we're just into June, and I hear it is going to rain tomorrow. It's maybe not the best timed poem, but I'm going to start with it anyway. It's called How to Bring Down Rain. First, listen to the old men. Watch their dry lips flap. Throw sheep bones in the river, ribs and unlinked wings of spine. See the water wet them. It's possible. Shoulder the sun and walk the fence line west. Wipe an oily head of sweat on your t-shirt. Now come in for lunch. Tomato sandwich, ice water, the easy chair in the cellar where you open all your father's books. Breathe their inky dust. Then dream him an old man. Dream him dead again. Years later when fathers should die. Chase your sister with a broken mouse. Tell your brother lies about the neighbor girl. Though there's no water anymore, crack off the ram's skull, toss it in the river too. See the gravel smooth as skin and your mother's face like gravel. Look at her. No, God does not hate you. The 9 years of drought is child's play. Now come back to the old men. See them rise from wooden chairs. Hear their bones sift the dust of yesterday's rain. So I grew up way out in eastern Montana, on a stretch of high desert called the Big Dry. And so it's been quite the thing to be raising my children in the Willamette Valley with all the ferns and slugs and everything else, and so close to the coast. So this is from my second book, Notes from the Journey Westward, which sort of does some excavation into the past, does some sort of, I call them the ancestor poems, or poems that come from before. And so I'm going to read two of those. And the first one is the title poem. It's called Notes from the Journey Westward. We died in the wagon. We had been sick since Wyoming, since the skin of things had begun to pock with sagebrush and knobs of rock, like the wrecked face of that bare-knuckle man back in Cincinnati. We said our little prayers. In our fever, the angels came. They had no teeth, tongues thick as snakes, sky-wide mouths, lips cracked as ours. In this dry place, we decided, even the seraphim must thirst. We ate the meat they gave us and were hungry. We drank the milk and were thirsty. We pissed where we lay and did not understand, yet we asked no questions. We knew the only answer was farther west. And here is what they did. Above a dry valley, up under a sandstone ledge, they shoveled us in. If it weren't for the blood, our snapped and lolling bones, dust the wagon left settling on our lips, we might have had the look of lovers. Once we were given an orange. This was early, just across the Missouri, the grass, thick green willows weeping along the creeks. We would still walk then, a minute here or there, hand on a horse's muscled rump. And at the very hour of our death, again we tasted it, how we ate it, peel and all. So the part of the country I came through wasn't settled until far later. The Willamette Valley is so much older than the part of the country I come from because no one wanted to stay there. It was terrible country. You know, that old game Oregon Trail, if you won, this is what you got, right? You got Portland and the whole Willamette Valley. But the part of the country I come from was passed over for years and years until it was... more trains were run across it, and then it was sold. And the big homestead boom was in 1908, and it was followed by a number of years of incredible rain. We average about 12 inches of rain a year in that country, and by incredible I mean like over 20. You know, so it was big for that country. And so hundreds of thousands of people poured in, hundreds of thousands of people, and then in 1917, it started to go back to what it was. And then in 1918, it further sort of dropped back. And by 1919, we were back into a drought, 7-8 inches of rain a year. And so hundreds of thousands of people poured out. And so they call it, some historians have called it one of the sort of ignored mass migrations of people because a lot of them came in after the 1910 census. So we don't really have a scope of the actual numbers of people. But those are sort of some of the ancestors I'm getting at here. One of those ancestors is my grandmother, whose father snuck into the country through Canada, an Irishman, and the only land he could find to lease was on the Crow Reservation in central Montana, and so she grew up the only white family for miles and miles. This is called Mission School 1922, What She Remembered. That for a winter's share of months, which felt then to her like years, teacher shut the schoolhouse doors. That one day sunlight dazzled the still snow-blue mountains, that it was nearly freezing, but for the light it seemed the day was warm. That she found digging in the creek bank with a dull axe a frog frozen as a stone, not a beat left in its still bright heart. That even in the brace of April, on her way to school again, the wind's hard blade bit to the bloody quick her old horse's hocks and belly. That one tight knot of ice at a time the creek came unstuck, that all day it pulled and snapped like pine burls in a fire, like gunshots for no reason in the night, like the marrow bones Mother Warman broke between her teeth. That at recess the Warman boys would steal potatoes and kisses, chase her until her head spun, her good heart heaving with the burn and throb of blood. How she loved it. The three of them back of the clapboard school, mineral smell of snowmelt and mountain, lick of government grease down a still warm potato. How her own body warmed as the world warmed. How like riding home in the whole sky spill of spring rain, there was no clean line between her and it. How finally it was rain, not snow. How when the creek slid back into its channel, they found both boys tangled naked in the roots of a cottonwood. How on the flood grass they laid them out like fish. How they were their bodies. How they were not their bodies. How the hearts of boys do not freeze but fill. How on the way to school she rode by Mother Warman, wailing their cottonwoods, notching her wrists and shoulders. How those May mornings her old horse loved more than anything the hearts of plum flowers. How teacher made the Crow girls wash with lye their lousy hair. How they screamed that for days after their scalps were white as snow. So you come of age in a particular place, and at least if you're me, you don't know anything else. You think that world is the world, and you don't quite understand that it's particular and peculiar in its ways. And one of the things that I realized quite quickly when I went off to college, I lived the first 19 years of my life on the ranch out on the Big Dry. One of the first things I realized going to college is that many of my stories sort of needed sort of like a Google Translate function, right? Like they just didn't compute for many people. I would talk about sheep shearing, and people would look at me like, "Wait a minute, slow down. What? Sheep shearing?" And so much of what I began to do and continue to do as a writer is try to reach back into that space and bring it forward. So I was researching sheep shearing and poking around, and because it was just a given to me, right? It happened every spring. The sheep shearers would come in and they would haul in this big. It was on the back of a semi truck, and it sort of looked like a semi truck trailer, though a little bit shoddier, a little more sort of like it might fall apart, as it was coming down the road. And they would back it up to the corrals, and the sides would sort of fall down, and that's where you would herd the sheep in, and the shearers would work in these sort of individual cells, shear the sheep and kick the fleece out one side and the sheep out the other. And it was sort of like a big carnival. We would stay out of school for 4 or 5 days, and all the neighbor families would come over and bring their sheep in, right? So you do one person's sheep and then the next person's sheep. And there was always food. I just remember so much food. It was amazing. It was so great. Always food out on the tables. And the shearers themselves were, this is what they did with their lives. They traveled from farm to farm shearing sheep, and many of them had families, and they would show up in Airstream trailers, some of the ones with families, or they would show up, just sleeping in their trucks, some of the bachelor men. And they were quite the rambunctious crew, sort of late night kind of crew. It was almost guaranteed that if you had sort of 6 places where shearers could work, at least 2 or 3 of those would be out because those shearers would have too big of hangovers until noon, and then they could come in and work. But anyway, so poking around, I found this entry on Wikipedia, and that's the epigraph to this poem, which is called The Sheep Shearers, and the epigraph is, "A distinct culture has evolved out of the practice of shearing sheep." Wikipedia. All long necks and whiskers and 3-day hangovers sweated out in the peeling linoleum of some low-slung camper. All greasy jeans and pearl snap shirts undone to the belly, all black coffee and cigarettes and potted meat. No one respectable, that's for sure. Though come March, it wasn't about respectable. From behind the old sofa, you watch Johnny Ahern sprawl in a chair at the kitchen table, wet trail of snooze dripping down his frog's chin. Your mother fed him 3 kinds of pie, Your father shook his gnarled hand that could take a sheep to skin in seconds, and said, "Thanks for coming, Johnny. The Lord and the devil know we need you." Skinny as a barn cat, the one that knocked on the door and came in for chamomile tea and a visit with your mother. Her face was square and small, a ribbon of scar from ear to chin, and after her small cup she rolled a cigarette, tapped the ash into her palm. She was one of those that could have been 23 or 42, no matter. What you remember most is how her straw hair was pulled back with flowers. It was yet midwinter. She must have grown them in whichever rusted airstream she called home, carried them in her lap through 1,000 icy miles of mountain two-lane, set them in the sink after the table was broke down into a marriage bed. And now, wringing her wrecked face, umber buds, filigree of leaf, a crown of wild rose. Milk-faced and bare-chested, trousers gone to threads, they stood in a ragged line and stared at you. You stared back. They didn't speak but turned and ran to the river, so you followed. Picked up a rock like they did and winged it at a carp. Together you floated a hunk of cottonwood to the far bank, set a muskrat trap, jostled and laughed, and when the sheep were sheared, the men gone into town for liquor, women gathering dogs and laundry, you sat on the steps and worked river mud from between your toes, felt with each breath the bluing bruise on your chest, where after she threw you to the ground, that dark-eyed shearer's girl propped a knee to pin you and kissed you hard on the mouth. So a little transition in the reading here before I move to the latest book, which I think of these as the Westerns, right? And this is the Midwestern. And this is kind of a traveling poem, a Midwest poem. I took my wife to beautiful, exotic La Crosse, Wisconsin one weekend. And it's a Mississippi river town, so it's these beautiful river bluffs up top. And it's sort of classic river town in that there's these amazing houses up there, just beautiful, old, grand houses. And then the town in the river bottom is a piece of work. It's a little rough around the edges. When we happened to be there, it's winter. It's always winter in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and it was snowing up there, but it was big, fat, beautiful flakes up on those lovely houses up top, right? But down on the river bottom, it was just warm enough that it was sort of this sleety, messy, slushy stuff, right? So it was you could literally look up and see this beautiful snow, and down here it was ice and sort of grimy stuff. And to top it off, we stayed at such a nice place that we could hear the couple next to us arguing most of the night. And when I say the couple, really what we could hear is we could hear him, and we could hear someone responding, but we couldn't make out what she was saying. So his voice steps into this poem, or at least his sort of one-sided argument. It's called "On the Beginning of Winter in Some Lost Industrial City of the North River Country. Coat sleeves, weeping brick, so the sky kicks down its cold doors, the woman next door saying something. Nothing, baby, nothing, he says back. I don't know one thing about that. The river ice, the sky ice, a boy's face ice-racked, red as flowers, his blood big. His mother, where is she? Next door. Baby, please, you want a cigarette, baby? Now like wet factory smoke, the dark falling. How smoke is evidence, how nothing's burning. So streetlight, so black hat, your breath riding the wind's bad back down the pocked alley, up the gin store's grim bricks, and up the cloud-laddered sky, the stone bluffs east of town, then to break, fade like common smoke. Up there, big houses and bur oaks in their vestal robes of snow. Down here, ropes of icy rain, sumacs frozen, broken fingers. Down here, a man opening a door into some kind of life, saying, baby, I think I'll step out. Get me some cigarettes. You want something, baby? So when I first moved to the Midwest, we spent 6 years in Iowa before coming to Oregon. And when I first moved there, I found myself sort of cut off from the landscapes of the West, cut off from the source of a lot of what I'd written, and I didn't realize how much that would affect me, both as a person and in my writing life, and it was sort of a struggle to try to find a way to keep writing, to think this displacement through. And one of the ways I found of doing that is stepping into someone else's shoes, stepping into another space, writing from someone else's point of view. And as I began to do that, as I began to try to look at this new world I was in from a new space, it suddenly made a lot more sense. It started to feel like I could be here. And one of the early things when we moved, I remember, so I was in a small town, 4,000 people, and it was definitely one of the biggest news stories of years probably, but an inmate escaped from the town jail, which is right in the center of town, right next to the Lutheran church, right? And he escaped. I heard it in the news. I heard it from my neighbor, as I was walking to campus that morning. And as I'm walking to campus, it's February in Iowa, and the snow is like this deep on the corners where the plows have been kicking it up, and it's been there for 3 months. It's going to be there for 3 more months. It's not going away, and I just remember thinking, like, why escape now? What compelled you? What was it? Why not wait, plan this out a little bit more? But the more I thought about it, I thought, well, he must have needed to get out now. And so this poem is in his voice. It's called Leviathan, and it has 2 epigraphs. An inmate at the Winnebago County Jail escaped for a number of hours before North Iowa authorities captured him. KTTC NBC affiliate, February 12th, 2010. When I lie down, I say, when shall I arise and the night be gone? Job 7:4. There was a time along the river, in the snow and cold, I didn't know where I was going. I'd come crashing through river birch, willows, sumac that tore my feet. I had no shoes. My pants were a problem, baggy, striped. I took them off, everything. I took it off. There, along the frozen river, I stripped bare-ass naked. Fat carp were iced into the falls. Some big dark owl came over quiet as suffering Christ, and I was my body, like a boy out all day, and who cares how cold it is. My breaths steamed out in chuffs and huffs. My tongue tasted weeds and water, black leech-track stones up from the river's muddy bottom. Beneath the ice, even there, the river knows. So I followed wherever it was going, red flakes trailing from my blue feet. Out the country club's picture window, I guess, someone saw me, or my bleeding. And now I sit here, warm as toast, my body lost, toeless feet black as stones. Why? What's it worth? I tell you, every night I dream the Winnebago River. Long wing of ice and leaning penitent trees, miracle carp unfroze, flopping bare-assed in the snow, sirens. And this time I stop, still as river birch. Above me my owl god of flight and silence, and having with my own eyes seen, I am Job. The falling snow, not silver coins or rings, not some thousand sheep. For as they rush out, rifles, bullhorns, black shoes, my rucked and filthy skin carries this light-shot skin of snow. Another of the persona poems. This was a man I biked by to campus every day, and eventually would stop and say hello and talk for a while. But for a long time, I didn't know him, but we would look at one another as I biked by. It's called The Can Picker, First in Cowles. I will tell you what it means to have been miles and be back now in the early afternoon to the Baptist church, my nest of ginkgo leaves and rags. It means the early fog rode my right shoulder, the last stars my left. It means an arrow of crying geese when I close my eyes. It means back of the Value Mart, a coyote snouting through the night's grease. It means boot slap, early blister, boot slap. It means oil slick, diesel stink, tire whine, piston shriek, machining my all-day ear. It means wait at the light, hole in the heart, piss and rain and puddle. Means and thank Christ coffee at the diner on the highway where the waitresses are mother dreams and mean as angels. You know the bones, the aches and vapors, the creaks and cracks, the one cold rib you split all those years ago slipping on a river rock that time fishing with your father. Means your gone father walks with you. Every gone and going lover walks with you. The world is wiled away with the dead and alive and who knows host of those you love. And can you say the same? Can you, when you come upon me in my raggy corner beneath the church's gabled roof, picking through my 50-gallon sack of cans, can you, when you come upon me and I see you, seeing me, and I call hello to you, can you call hello back to me? Can you see we have this day on the earth each done what is ours to do? Can you see that by grace or happenstance or whatever it is, you give breath or fire, we are here at First in Cowles, adored each by the green hands of ginkgo leaves? So one of the other things you do in the long Iowa winter, besides read the paper and think about poems, is you either start or continue your family, as the case may be. And so that's what we did. And so, as you know, as I say, I want to say we were pregnant, but of course my wife was pregnant. Liz was pregnant. I wasn't. So she's doing all this important biological work, and so I thought I'd try to do some important poetic work. And so I wrote this series of poems, and they were all notes to my unborn son about something, right? I was trying to speak about important things, weighty matters. So this is called Note to My Unborn Son Concerning Canadian Folk Music. Working now around the great bulk of her belly, that blue-veined globe, blood-thrummed world of which we know and know so little. She sets the dimple of the Alvarez on her knee and with her water-swollen hand frets a Gordon Lightfoot tune, the one about the rain. Listen, little fish, I want to know, does Omphalos' blood ring with the quiver of sheep-gut strings? Do you bow down and rise up, the lone ocean of you storm against some placental sand? Is the voice of love wavery, waterlogged beyond us always? With her mouth she sings an aching in my heart, my pockets full of sand.
Did you have a son?
Yeah. I knew that by then. I wasn't gonna, Yeah. Yeah. So in this little town we lived in, the big sort of social event of the year was the garage sale days spelled with a Z. And it was the weekend that everyone would have a garage sale, and they'd print a special issue of the paper, and everyone sort of put their most, the coolest things they were going to sell at their garage sale in there. And you weren't supposed to open your sale till Friday morning, but some people would cheat and open on Thursday night. But it was a big deal in town, and it happened to coincide with the imminent birth of our son. So this is called the Garage Sale Days Meditations. It's in 5 parts. So 1, Look at them, slumped in the corner there, ears pounded and mouse-bitten, ragged legs askew, rubber lips kissing cold cement. Even here, among the abandoned, they are twice forsaken. The coffee cup, chipped to a wobble, is ever at hand. The faded sweater desires shoulders, sure, but a hanger anyway does the trick. Even that flattened football fairly whistles with tossed potential. What is it that goes out of dolls? They have never been more than what they are. How is it they now look less? Don't look, says the mother, left arm crooked and loaded with a dozen pairs of slacks. Honey, if they scare you, just look the other way. Her little girl knows already we're only going the one way, and so takes the measure of these one-eyed, earless, hacked-balled dolls, takes a step closer, her own rubber soles kissing cold cement. 2. On every one, she's put a price tag. Oh, sure, as old alphabet blocks go, they're good. This clown's lips still strawberry, each tree green and tall. But why is S 20 cents? And why, Q, are you a dime less demanding? Or Mr. Victory, upright V, with your violet ink and predictable violin, why do you deserve not just a dime, but a dozen cents? It doesn't make any sense. Though maybe her first husband was a Leon or a Larry, and that's why L is had now for the linty nickel at the bottom of my pocket. 3. Wayne, it says, on the back of the upright mirror in blue Koran. The woman at the shoebox till, hair crimped and bleached, can't be more than 24. I don't hear a thing from the house. And 2, there are the toys. Yellow dump truck without a wheel, box of just worn baseballs, those few pairs of some small boy's patch-knee jeans. Where, oh, where can he be? God of garage sales, of Jefferson Airplane 8-tracks, of mismatched rose-patterned plates, of shave cream bottles shaped like rocket ships and stilettos red as sour candy, of 16 neon t-shirts imploring one and all to eat at Jake's, of just $1, 3 for 1, you won't find another, of all things culled from basement closet corners, of all things wearing a decade's furs of dust, of all things justly and unjustly junked. I pray now, here in this stranger's strange garage, for this one whose blue name is Wayne. 4. Iowans are easy, all smiles and apologies. But the nicest set of drawers I've found belongs to the Italian down the street. All his 80 years and 98 pounds given to rage. Rage at whatever idiocy the new day brings. Today, I offer 30. His old face fists, his 2 fists like birds shot dead. You think my things are not so nice? You think I sell this good thing I bought in Omaha with my own money? Bought when I was young, too? When I was man as you? That's what you think? $32.50. You haul it out yourself. 5. It's gotten darker than I hoped. And so after fingering for hours the hidden, homely things of these, my town's men and women, I'm on my way back home. Before I left, you said only what's on the list. And because I love you, I promised. Though right off, I think you'll understand these LPs. Look here, Little Feat's Dixie Chicken couldn't be passed up. The Jimmy Carter coffee cup, that may be a stretch, but it was only 50 cents. And for $1, I got this charcoal grill shaped like a can of Pabst. Can you believe it? Just $1. Yes, I found a rocking chair, changing table, swing, and bouncing seat. Yes, now we're ready. Yes, I'm as happy as can be. Yes, life is made of cast-off things. God, yes, we need that yellow pail. It's for him to carry things in, whoever he is, whatever he needs to carry. Two more poems. One, more and more, I think I'm beginning to learn. We're often trying to parent the child we were, and I think that our children's childhoods bring us back to our own childhoods, and there's this interesting thing that happens in that space, and I think that can throw many of us for a loop, because we are suddenly confronted with things that we hadn't thought about or hadn't wanted to think about or had thought we were past for many years, and then as our children come, we see them and we can't help but put ourselves back into that same place. But I think too that can be a kind of a joy, that can be a kind of release, a kind of way to make a different decision, to sort of do that wish, right? I wish it had gone like this, or I wish it could be this way, and then suddenly it can, right? Because there's this new chance, which is the glory of all this human activity, that there is this next chance. And so this poem is called Wish. From the great meaty boils of wintering burrows, rattlers stir, shudder, and unspool. Stunned blind, they slip and essingly spill down yellow hills, forked tongues tasting the gravel road's good heat. And there, on blue quartz, on schist, on the cat's eyes of agates and the rocked remains of ancient oceanic brethren, they coil into thick, rippling rings, wedge heads roosting on the oozeful thrones of snake bellies. A whole road of them, curled here, curled there, waiting for the blood to hiss and rise, the body's whip to willingly unloop and lick a strike. They wait and praise the face of the sun, the white fact of it like some child's warm, enormous, still good God. Oh, I'd drive like the devil, fast and swervy, popping snakes beneath my tires. I could feel each small thump thwunk up through my spine. In the rear view then, a dusty ribbon of red-pocked road. It was as easy as a wish, a prayer. The way, hands on the black wheel, foot mashed to the rust-bitten floorboard, I prayed the sky might stumble, the rain fall, and the river fill to the goddamn brim, that my mother might love the living like she did the dead. Oh, all that was a long time ago, and I have prayed those wishes down. Today, I hold my son close as we kneel in lashings of rusty grass, watch a quick, dappled snake slip into this other river. Okay, so last poem here, the title poem. I tell my kids a story most nights. And they're very fond of stories about when I was a boy and I made bad choices and got in trouble. Those are their favorite stories. But sometimes they want other kinds of stories too. And just the other day, my daughter said, "How did everything get its name? I'm interested in the names." And I thought, oh, okay. So I told some various different, mythological versions of that story, and they were just loving it. But one night a few years ago, my son was sort of half asleep, kind of drifting in that liminal space. And I said, "Do you want a story tonight? What kind of story do you want?" And he said, "Tell me the story. Tell me the story about when we were birds." And I thought, oh, wow. Okay. So I put something together that night, and then the next morning, immediately started working on this poem, which is called "My Son Asks for the Story About When We Were Birds." When we were birds, we veered and wheeled, we flapped and looped, it's true, we flew. When we were birds, we dined on tiny silver fish and the watery hearts of flowers. When we were birds, we sistered the dragonfly, brothered the night-wise bat, and sometimes when we were birds, we rose as high as we could go, light, cold, and strange. And when we opened our beaked mouths, sundown poured like wine down our throats. When we were birds, we worshipped trees, rivers, mountains, sage knots, rain, gizzard rocks, grub-shot dung piles, and like all good beasts and wise green things, the mothering sun. We had many gods when we were birds, and each in her own way was good to us, even winter fog, which found us huddling in salal or silk tassel, singing low, sweet songs, and closing our blood-rich eyes and sleeping the troubled sleep of birds. Yes, even when we were birds, we were sometimes troubled and tired, sad for no reason, and so pretended we were not birds, and fell like stones, the earth hurtling up to meet us, our trussed bones readying to be shattered, our unusually large hearts pounding for nothing. Yet at the last minute we would flap and lift, and as we flew shudderingly away, we told ourselves that this falling we would remember. We thought we would always be birds. We didn't know. We didn't know we could love one another with such ferocity that we should. Thank you. I don't know if questions are part of the program, but okay, but if they are, I'd be happy to attempt to answer some.
Well, I have one.
Yeah.
Which is, when did you decide that you wanted to be a writer? A poet?
Yeah.
And just how did that all come about
Yeah.
for you?
Well, so I didn't, growing up where I did, well, a community of poverty. It wasn't a thing that anyone around me did. I didn't know that it was possible in many ways. I thought actually everything had been written, that we'd finished that, right? But I was always a reader. I was always reading. My mother was a reader. My grandparents were both readers, even though my grandfather only had an 8th grade education. He was very much a reader. And so I was always reading. I went off to college at Gonzaga University in Spokane, and I studied computer engineering there. And had an internship one summer and realized I didn't like computer engineering at all. But I didn't know what I did like. So I sort of stumbled along in the major and decided to do a 5th year, a victory lap senior year. And it was in that year that I had enough room in my very tight engineering schedule to take some classes across campus. And I took a writing class, a poetry writing class. And it was so I think it was the very first day. The professor came in and without an introduction or anything, just started reading Richard Hugo's Degree of Grey in Phillipsburg. And I didn't know Hugo, I didn't know contemporary poetry at all, and he started reading it, and very quickly I thought, I don't know what this is, but I like this. It was very much a quick and instantaneous falling in love. I whatever this was, I wanted it in my life. I wanted this to be part of who I was and what I did in the world. And so then I kept from there. I was writing from then on, and I taught high school for a while, and then went back to grad school, and then now teach at Linfield.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on Ivan Doig? Was he very much a part of your culture?
Yes, he was. Doig's, especially the memoir, This House of Sky, was huge for me. He was, House of Sky was published in the 70s, and I probably first picked it up in the early 90s. So it felt far enough away that it still felt somewhat inaccessible, maybe. But the story itself was astonishing. That first paragraph, when he talks about the fir-dark flanks of Hatfield Mountain, and then he stumbles down to his mother's last breath, right? It was just stunning, and it still is stunning to me. And then I later found his novels, which I love very much. Yes, yeah.
Story about sheep shearing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yes, he's been very important to me as a writer. Absolutely. Yeah. Another question.
Yeah. Are you living in the Willamette Valley? Are you starting to write about
Yeah, some. I mean, the last poem I read, the title poem here, was a very early poem when we first moved to Oregon. Got the Salal in there. Yeah. So definitely writing about that. Writing about it especially through my children's experiences, and so I think I was maybe 17 the first time I ever saw the ocean. And I've maybe been to the ocean a handful more times than my children have at this point, like literally like 5 more times. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be part of them in a way that it's never going to be part of me, right? Even though we'll share this time together. And so a lot of what I'm writing about is trying to reckon with that, the difference of how the landscape makes us and who it turns us into and what possibilities it allows us and maybe what it doesn't allow us. And then that's also... Tom mentioned our time down on the Rogue River, and a lot of that time has been going into that too, when we were out there, and how intense a time it was, living off the grid with 2 young children, but how good as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you write about animals?
Yeah, I do. We got the birds in here. The title poem from the first book is about, I grew up with animals. Animals were very close to me growing up. We had a sheep and cattle ranch. We had chickens. We had geese. We had donkeys. The wild animals were close to us. I mean, I can still hear, I can call immediately to mind coyotes in the hills. The antelope, great herds of antelope, and sage grouse, the thrum of sage grouse as you scare them up. So animals were very much close to us. And this is another thing I think about with kids, how much animals are there, I think sort of their intermediaries in the world, how my children, who aren't as close to many animals, still are so interested in them and still want to be with them and have this connection. And so I write about a lot of that. The title poem from the first book is about a night when the neighbor's dogs got into our sheep and killed about 3 dozen head one night. And sort of the frontier justice, of course, is that if your dogs kill someone's livestock, then you kill the dogs, right? So it's a poem about that and reckoning with memory. I don't have very many memories of my father, but animals are all over the place in my work. Yeah, I think it's important to remember who we're here with. Yeah.
What poets would you say influenced you?
Oh boy, lots. Well, Richard Hugo, the Montana poet, is a great influence. Again, even though I think by that point I'd started to understand that the writing wasn't done yet, that people were still doing it. I didn't know you could write about little towns in Montana. I didn't know that was okay to do. And he was doing that, and it was, mind-opening. The poet B.H. Fairchild, who often writes about memory, his book, Early Occult Memory Systems of the Lower Midwest, is just phenomenal. Oh my goodness. The first poems in there just knocked me out. There's an Oregon poet, he's in Idaho now, but from Coos Bay, Michael McGriff, who I think is, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say it, one of like 3 of the best poets writing in the country today. He's just astonishingly good. I just love him. I think there's many other poets too, sort of taking a wider glance, who've been super important to me. One lately who I've been reading a lot of is Ross Gay. I don't know if you know Ross Gay's work, but he writes out of the Midwest. He's a former star college football player, big guy, and he's a gardener. He loves gardening. He loves flowers. And his recent book, it was a finalist for the National Book Award, Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, is really lovely. It's so kind and wise and just really, really wonderful. Another one who is important to me, remains important to me, but especially his early work I keep close, is Gary Soto. he has this great essay about finding his true subjects and writing the first moments of what would become his long poem, The Elements of San Joaquin, and being so shocked at this new place his work was going that he wanted to get up, right? He didn't want to trust it, but he forced himself to stay right out of first draft. And then he sort of bolted out of the door and was walking around the streets of Fresno, sort of not even really knowing where he was going, until a friend bumped into him and was like, "Hey, are you okay? You don't look good." And he's like, I don't know. And the friend sort of corralled him in and brought him in and fed him dinner. And then he was okay after that. But I often tell that story to students about that. Finding your subject is important. You've got to find what it is you need to write about, whatever it is that you feel most passionate about or called to or upset about, whatever it happens to be. So those are some. There's loads of poets that I love that I could name.
Did you get to meet Billy Collins? Tom mentioned that.
Yeah. No, I didn't get to meet Billy Collins. Billy Collins curates the series, I think as a favor of gratitude. Miller Williams, who for many, many years ran University of Arkansas Press, published his first book. And sort of, I think, as a debt of gratitude, now orchestrates the Miller Williams series there. And so he selected the book. He wrote me a very kind, brief note, but handwritten note. And I got that one day, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is from Billy Collins. And then I wrote him a longer, gushing note back, and that's been the extent of our correspondence.
Where did you go to grad school?
I went to grad school at the University of Idaho.
How old are your kids?
They are 7 and 6, 7-year-olds, just about to turn 8, though. He's pretty excited.
Do you teach anything besides poetry at Linfield?
Yeah, so I actually teach creative nonfiction there for the most part in the creative writing program. The memoir is sort of what brought me to Linfield. The way we sort of reconfigured our major, we're going to be switching back and forth, which I'm excited about. So I'll get a chance to teach poetry again. And so I teach nonfiction, we'll be teaching poetry. I teach our intro to creative writing class, a class I love. You get students from all over the place. Accounting majors in there. I had this accounting major last fall. Amazing young person, Tanya. First in her family to go to college. Her parents are undocumented. And she is just killing it. I mean, writing so well. It's astonishing. And then she took another class in the spring. So she's still an accounting major, but not for long, I don't think. And then I get to teach a little bit of American literature. So I teach a class called Darkness on the Edge of Town, Rural America and Contemporary Literature, and it's about sort of writing from rural, the entirety of rural America, not just the West, but across the nation.
So what authors are included in that?
Yeah, so we so the sort of the way the class fits into the curriculum is that it's a class about genre. So we cover a number of genres, and so we read 2 books of fiction. We read Kent Harif's Plainsong and Bonnie Jo Campbell's American Salvage, which everyone talks about hillbilly elegy. It's fine, it's a good start, but it's in the end I don't think quite even comes close to capturing sort of the Rust Belt anxiety that Bonnie Jo Campbell's American Salvage did, and she did it like 7 years ago. It is so good. Oh my goodness. So we read Harrow's Plainsong, Bonnie Jo Campbell's American Salvage, and then we switch to nonfiction. We read Jessamine Ward's Men We Reaped, which is a fabulous, terrifying, and sad book. She grew up in an African-American community, a rural African-American community on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, DeLille, Mississippi. And in the space of 4 years, 5 young men in her community are killed. And so it's about sort of including her brother. And so she sort of goes back in and tries to excavate what's going on here. Why are these young men dying? And so it's about that. We read Lacey Johnson's Trespasses, which is a funny book, built in fragments, but worthwhile in the end. In it, she posits and my students have a field day with this because they really argue with one another about it. She posits that that white trash needs to be understood as a racial category. That the idea of white trash, by the name itself, white trash, right, not just trash, posits a kind of racialization, that it's not only about poverty or place you grew up, but it's inherited, right, which is one of the markers, at least we commonly understood to be racial, is something that's inherited, right, that you pass on. I don't know if she lands the argument, but my students sure have a good time, or maybe not a good time, a challenging time talking about it, which I think is good for them. And then we read two poets. We read Natalie Diaz's When My Brother Was an Aztec, which is a wonderful book. She grew up on the Fort Mojave Indian Reservation. She's Mojave and Hispanic, and it's an interesting look both at racism, addiction, as well as she's it's almost unfair that so much talent is in one person, but she's a former professional basketball player. And so it's sort of about leaving the reservation too. I'm friends with her on Facebook, and every once in a while she'll post these videos of herself just like draining three-pointer after three-pointer. And as a basketball fanatic, I'm just like, man, I wish. And then we read the Oregon poet Michael McGriff, who I just love. We read his book Home Burial in that class, and it's quite good. It's quite good.
A lot of reading.
What's that?
A lot of reading.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Make them work. Yeah. And then the other class I teach, we do an inquiry seminar, which is kind of like a freshman writing class, but it's built around the idea of inquiry. And I teach a class called From the Beats to the Beatles, the history and literature of 1960s social movements. And that's a fun class.
I want to take all your.
Oh, good. I love teaching them.
So one more question?
Well, I just want to say your poetry is astonishing.
Oh, thank you.
I just love your poetry.
Thank you. Well, thank you all again for coming out.
Let's give her a- Books are here, so Joe's going to be here for